It's a real pleasure. I can't wait to chat to you about this. So
yeah.
Today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start from the very beginning. What is emotional intelligence?
Well, I can imagine that if you Googled this, there'd be lots of different interpretations, but basically it's about the ability to understand your own emotions and manage them, and to also understand the emotions of others and perhaps how that impacts their behaviour and who they are.
So how then, this can go across all walks of life, I imagine.
Yes.
Whether it's your relationships, it's your career, it's your conversation with your friends.
Yeah.
So if someone is hearing about this for the very first time today, what's the steps? Like where can they start thinking about, what's my emotional intelligence level, or how can I improve it? Or
well, just having that thought about who you are and how can I be better, and recognising that you could improve on some things is all about your self-awareness. But I think the first point about this is that as individuals, our IQ, we know about our IQ, we don't, and our intelligence literally slows down and gets to its maximum area at about late teens. Okay, so we're never going to get that much cleverer than we are at that stage, so that stops. But the emotional intelligence is something that can grow and grow until you even get to sort of the grand old age that I'm at, whereby and it happens at different stages, but the interest in understanding how you can improve and be a better person actually shows a level of self-awareness and a level of emotional intelligence as well.
So let's get a bit deeper. So when we're thinking about emotional intelligence, like what is that? How's that showing up in a practical sense? So I'm thinking about utilising or using empathy or having understanding. And if I think about someone in my life today who maybe I think could be more aware or emotionally intelligent, what did they do recently? They just went straight into an important meeting without any charisma with the room, with communicating with people. It was straight into business.
Yeah.
And I thought, don't think I would have approached my meeting that way. So, like, where does it start? Like, how do you?
I understand. It's not easy to put your finger on where it starts, because a lot of human beings are naturally blessed with the ability to have really strong emotional connections and emotional intelligence, and might go through their life without anybody ever consciously saying, oh, you could improve on that area, or you could improve on that. The way that I've approached this, which I guess isn't unusual, is the fact that I always looked at it from a work perspective, because I wanted to improve myself. And then once I realised that we'd got this way of growing as individuals that was beyond intelligence, I became really interested, because I'm a people watcher. Like, I think a lot of people that listen to this will recognise that that's something that we all like to do. We like to watch people. You think, why did they do that? Just like you said about the chap that went into a meeting, and why didn't they think about that? And a lot of it starts with somebody pointing out and being brave enough to say to them, hey, I think that you did it. It depends how you do your feedback, but you did a great job there. Maybe, though, you went in with a strong message, and it might have been better to preface it with this, or how do you think it could have gone better? And sometimes you have to earn the right to have that conversation with somebody, and it is easier to broach those subjects when you're somebody's leader. I've studied emotional intelligence. I'm not by far from being the absolute world expert, but I've used it as a tool to help me in my work and myself. I'd love to use it at home, but I don't think I'll get away with it. Hey, let me give you some feedback, darling.
Let's think about it in a work context now. So one of the things that I look for in salespeople is the ability to build rapport.
Yes.
So quite often when I'm working with a salesperson coaching, or I'm observing from a leadership perspective, or we're on a sales call, one of the first things that I think about when we enter a sales call is what are the 2 or 3 minutes of chat, which I would like to think of as building rapport.
Yeah.
The comment you make about the customer who's got something on the wall, or they've got a t-shirt that says something, or you find a way of communicating with them which isn't about business or isn't about work. So I feel like that's an emotionally intelligent thing to do.
Yes.
It's probably no surprise that some of my customers, I found out their likes in football or family or those sorts of things really quickly, because now I can go, oh, your team got on really well at the weekend,
Yes.
or oh, how did Lucy get on with her dance on Saturday? Did it go well? And I feel like those sorts of emotionally, I didn't even know that was emotional intelligence.
Yes.
What's the opposite to that? The opposite to that is we started a meeting, now we're going to start. When's the order coming?
Yeah.
So I feel, let's talk about it in a work context. Why can it help?
So if you think about this world, we're full of people and we all a lot of us like to build relationships. But what we're veering off in the side of there as well maybe is personality types. And some people don't like small talk. Some people are shy and introverted. And so actually coming to the table and wanting to do the small talk isn't easy for them. But it's one of the first things I notice when I speak to. So I've worked in the customer success world for the last 15, 16 years. And it's one of the first things I notice about established CSMs who it's their job to speak to customers and to build a relationship with them. And if they don't have that rapport at the beginning, then it makes the job a lot harder, I think, because you get people on side. So building relationships is really key here. But it's just reminded me because it made me smile. So I'm going to talk to you about smiles. So first of all, I want to just preface that a lot of the stuff that I've learned more recently has been based on the Emotional Capitalists, written by Dr. Martin Newman and Judy Peirce, both psychologists. And some of the information and the stuff that they share with you is really, really good at teaching you how to be better in these different areas. It just doesn't tell you what it is. But one of the stories that he tells in the book is about, it's around optimism. We talked about optimism before. And they did a study, he worked with an organisation, they did a study, and optimism is another emotional intelligence feature. And being optimistic and the way that you view the world, it's not about the glass half full, glass half empty, but it's about how we frame stuff in our mind, our self-talk. But the smile, there was a study done, and there's two types of smiles. There's the Pan Am smile, that they call it, which is the fake smile, which doesn't use the face particularly at all. And then there's the Duchenne smile, which is a really genuine smile that involves all the muscles in the face. And you can spot it a mile off if you look at a picture. And so they did a study, and they looked at a year. It was an American study, but they looked at a class year, and they went through and they spotted the different types of smiles that were present in that picture. And they tracked those people over a number of years during their 20s, 30s, 40s. And the people that had the more natural smile, the Duchenne smile, were the people that tended to be more optimistic, more successful, and to have remained married for a lot longer and in longer, stronger held relationships, because they were a lot more genuine. And as people, we're not saying that people smile, they've got an awkward smile, but it's about knowing that people relate to you, and that often starts with a smile. And if you smile at somebody, there's an instinct that they'll smile back if it's genuine. And that's something that helps build relationships, and it also indicates that you're sort of slightly more genuine, easier going type of person, I guess.
So therefore, if I'm smiling for a genuine, authentic reason, because I'm comfortable with myself, and therefore I'm almost trying to think about the psychology there. So I'm inviting you in, almost to say, I'm comfortable, I'm cool.
Yeah. And then you do that whole thing about mirroring as well, because again, that comes into a bit like personality types, but we all know that mirroring, if you're comfortable with the person that you're with, you'll lean forward, you'll mirror their expressions, you'll smile, it's a lot easier. And so that is all around about building great relationships. And I think that if you flip it though, and you walk into a room, you're a relationship builder quite naturally, and you come across somebody that's not, and then you have to adapt, don't you, to if you're in sales and you want to win a customer, to win their trust ultimately, so that they will buy into you and your organization, then you have to appeal to them and their emotions. It's all about an emotional currency. That's why this is called emotional capitalists, because it's about the capital and the currency that we hold in us as our emotional intelligence. And if we're facing somebody who doesn't match us, then we have to sort of become a little bit more like them, a little bit calmer, maybe not so bouncy and loud, and a bit more formal and structured. Eventually, though, that person, unless there's something really, really wrong with them, will get used to you, but it just takes longer. You and I, we're in the business, we're in the currency of building relationships because that's been part of our job. Mine's a lot longer than yours, I have to say, but we're used to building relationships and doing that. But some people in different roles and different personality types, it's awkward for them, and it takes a while to build trust.
So actually, it's really great that in that case, in that scenario where there is a framework, there are things that you can do, books to read, to be able to support you with that emotional intelligence.
Yes. So my journey started with the books. I spent a long time not teaching myself anything, no self-education. And then somebody that I worked with, that we both know, Milena, she was an avid learner. And I was almost embarrassed about the fact that somebody that was in my team who was reporting into me, doing amazingly well in her role, but she was this avid learner, and I was like, oh, I don't do anything, I don't read anything, I don't do anything. And I saw her last week, and I said again, she got me into this journey of books. Now, they're not for everybody, but I use these books, and I've got a pile of them here that I brought with me just in case they cropped up. But I use these books to diagnose problems in the workplace, typically, or with myself. And I use them to have that as a tool. So I don't know them cover to cover, but if I can see that somebody's having difficulty, they're being a bit negative, and the world is against them. So I'm thinking, okay, so what can I do to help them? Because for me, if the spirits of my team or the way they feel or they're going through a bad time, not only does it affect me personally because I care about them, but it affects their ability to do their job well and for us to hit the goals and make the business successful. So I make it part of my DNA to dive into and talk to them about, I've noticed you're feeling, things aren't great at the moment. Are you happy to talk to me about it? Can I help? And normally, because I've got a good relationship, they'll open up and we'll have a good conversation. And sometimes it's personal stuff, but oftentimes it could be a work issue or personality clash. And then you can use this emotional intelligence tool to help diagnose where other people are short. So it helps you know how to approach them as well. So there are 10 typical typical scales here that Martin Newman uses for emotional intelligence. And every single one of us, if we're looking at somebody that we feel is a bit off kilter or we want to help grow, you can find it, whether it's from somebody high up in the building, or somebody that's working in an entry level role within the business. And you often notice though that oftentimes, not all the time, younger people are less self-aware and less aware of emotional intelligence because they've gone through the education network. They've had a lot to deal with, and then now comes maturity and being grown up, becoming self-reliant, which is another emotional intelligence strength as a leader. It's really, really important. It's about becoming self-reliant, and there's a maturity element to some of these what do I call them? Scales.
Scales.
Yes. So if you saw, there's an emotional intelligence capital report, which is a self-analysis report that you can take, and it comes out with these 10 competencies or traits, and it's like a scale. And on each of those, you score yourself, and according to what you think about yourself, it tells you where your strengths are or where maybe you've got some work to do. And it comes out actually literally with some guidance and advice. And that's where this framework differs to a lot of other books that are self-help. It gives you insight into how to or where to look to become better at these skills and traits. Sorry, it's calling them scales, but it's not. It's this whole overall thing's a scale. It's that they're traits and competencies really. And you take this it's about 50 questions. You answer them quite quickly. It takes 10-15 minutes to get through. And it's a really insightful report and come back. And you can use that with your leader if you want to, or just to teach yourself if you want to, or you can buy some coaching. And that's where, I guess, that's part of where I'm going to. I am actually a trained certified coach for this. That was a few years ago. I've been in full-time employment virtually since then. So this is where I will probably go to as a next step. But in the meantime, I just dipped in and out of it as and when. And Where was I going with that? This is where
It's
it's
just, you're telling me about
Yeah.
the scales.
Yes, the
and
scales.
journey
Yes,
you've
that's
got.
right. So you can do this report, and I've worked with a number of people on that, and that's what you think about yourself. But it's a million times more powerful if you get the feedback from other people. And you can do a 360 around it, and they answer the same questions. And quite often there's a disparity, quite often negatively, because we're quite hard on ourselves, a lot of us as human beings. And we lack confidence sometimes. But people don't always exude that externally. And so people see us in a different light to how we see ourselves. And so when I do the emotional capital report, the self report, and then the 360, it's a really great way of balancing out. Well, actually, you come across as far more intelligent, far more confident than you actually think that you do. And that's a really great immediate confidence boost for a lot of people.
I feel like part of this is your own self-esteem and your own confidence.
Yes.
And actually going through, and there being a framework
Yeah.
allows you to kind of like build that, even because you might look confident and have self-esteem, all those things to the outside world, but actually internally you think, oh God, I really struggle with communicating to people, talking to them about this, or actually I'd just rather not.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that. So do you work with people that may be feeling like, I really could do with some support in how to communicate it?
Yes, and it's very intuitive about self-confidence, because you have to try. Look, I'm not a trained trained in psychology or a skill. Yes, I am skilled maybe, but I'm not a trained coach in that area. And the way in which you approach this is really important for the individual, because everybody that's lacks in confidence, there's a lot of things that might be underlying it. So it might be they need professional counselling. That was the word I was looking for, counselling. And they might need professional counselling, and you can just scratch the surface a little bit with them. But in a workplace, if there's things that they're not confident about, then you can find out what they are and you can coach to that. And you can find strategies that will help them be better and stronger. But it takes time. If people have been, I think a lot of people that come up through the workplace that have great confidence are those that have had good coaches, good mentors along the way, the people that have believed in them, because it's very easy for us as human beings to feel knocked back by a lot of things and take things personally. And that's one of the biggest, the self-reliance, which is the first thing that he talks about in his book, is so powerful, and it's so important that we rely. If we want to be a really serious, strong leader, being independent of thought, not worrying about what people think about us, and not acquiescing and giving in to, or deferring to other people's judgment, and sacrificing our own thoughts and beliefs, is a really important step. And a lot of that is built from self-confidence. And helping people just step by step build their confidence is really, really important. But you've got to try and get to the root of what's causing it. And it could be how they articulate things. Mind and mouth don't go together. You might have spotted that a little bit with me. But the mind and the mouth don't always go together. So then you find ways of helping them. Small tasks, presentation tasks, speaking to the team, just little things to build their confidence, so that eventually it doesn't become even part of the conversation, because they've overcome it and they've built their self-esteem and their self-confidence. It takes time though.
Yeah, I can imagine it takes time, especially for people who are new to the workplace, especially the corporate environment which we're in. Is that, gosh, if I think about who I was when I was sort of entered this world when I was about 25, but with no real previous educational awareness of what this business world is like, or even working in an office.
Yeah.
So like, just, if you're fresh out of university and you're excited about getting to the workplace, that's great. But then you'll find out, there's office politics, and sometimes people in leadership don't communicate the way you're expecting them to, or not everyone's there. It's not fluffy. It's not sunshine and rainbows. And actually you'll find that you enter a situation where you've got some very powerful people, they cut you off or they cut you down, and that can be a real, those first 5 years, I would say, can be really challenging.
Yeah.
And I think these sorts of things, understanding your own emotional intelligence, but also then being aware of other people's, because it can really impact you yourself as well.
Yeah. If they taught this in schools, not necessarily to the leadership extent, but got people to talk more about emotional intelligence and coping mechanisms. And I think that with the there's been a lot of press, hasn't there, about the children, the youngsters, is it the Gen Z now, that are coming out from into the workplace. They're struggling with a lot of self-esteem issues and a lot of mental health issues, and I think that in education, if we were adopting an approach to emotional intelligence, and I think they do something, actually just reminded me, and they do something to for schools, but it's not highly, I don't think it's as highly adopted as it could be. But if we did something at school and taught children to be kinder to one another and to think about empathy and to be more self-confident. But it's so easy. I would think back to my own childhood when your parents, you show some initiative and they say, don't you dare do that again. Don't let me see you do that again. And there's probably lots of versions of the story of, child climbs a tree and the parents aren't there. One mum comes out and says, don't you dare do that again, you might get hurt. And another mum comes out and says, oh, you've got a good view up there. Maybe next time you do that, maybe you'll come and I can stand watch and make sure you're okay. So at a very early age, we really knock children's confidence, and we don't do it deliberately. Sometimes it's nurture, it's how we've been brought up, and it's an instinctive reaction to fear. But teaching children self-confidence, and then we see confident children, people, oh, they're a bit cocky, aren't they? They're a little bit precious. And so it's about getting an expectation of people being confident, or children being confident, from a very early age and not losing it.
I love that. So you just reminded me of something that happened the other day at home. And because Logan's 4, he's not going to school yet, he's going to school next year. But I've always felt really fortunate about the preschool that he goes to. They just seem to be exceptional at everything they do. And something that clearly came out, because he was at the dinner table and he just kind of stopped eating for a second and he was like, Mummy, I really love you. I was like, that's lovely. Daddy, I really love you. Then he went round all of the family members that he could remember. He said, oh, I really love them. I really love them. I really love them. I really love Badger, who's my cat, our cat. And then at the end, I thought, that's nice. That's all good. Then he went, and I really love myself.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, for a 4-year-old.
Yes.
And I love myself.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what? Because we wouldn't have given him those words at home.
No.
And I thought the preschool he goes to, they definitely would have had a session on that somewhere. Yes. And I checked them with the next day and I said, are you doing some sort of self-love, self-confidence thing recently? And I said, oh yeah, this week's been self-love week. And we've been teaching them about self-love. And I thought, wow, at 4 years old, you're learning that. And he exudes that kind of confidence. And I just love that about him. And, it just kind of just goes to your point really, which is, I think it's so important is, for as parents and also as people that lead businesses, is to build confidence and build self-confidence, that self-reliance, where, because a lot of it comes down to just, not everyone knows the answers, that's cool, but like just having the confidence that you can go and find the answers, or confidence it's going to be okay, or just, I think this is where I think all of this comes into its own, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, at some point, it sort of breaks off. It's great that he's in that environment. I know schools, I've seen it. They are trying to, they've stopped the, oh, Johnny could do better type of school reports, because that really does knock a child's confidence. And I know they're using different language now to help encourage it. But I think that overtly teaching emotional intelligence, some form of it in schools, I think would go a long way. And you talked, jumping back to something else you said just now, about people coming into the workplace for the first time. And that whole C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, and that why should we feel frightened to talk to somebody just because they're more senior and they've got a bigger job title? And it comes from somewhere, and it comes from a lack of self-confidence probably, but something that they've learned from somebody else. Oh, these are really important people. And I've had people, I've been fairly senior where I was, and new staff would look up to me and go, oh, but you're a senior director. I was like, I'm a human being. You can talk to me like you can talk to anybody else. And I feel it should be the same with the C-suite. They shouldn't put this, sometimes it's a deliberate sort of air of authority around them. There's a saying that I've learned in this journey, and from Eleanor Roosevelt said this: said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So we allow ourselves to be inferior if we want to be. And so I think that's a really powerful thing that we should try and remember if we can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it too. I managed to get it off without stumbling over it as well, just about. I'm great at remembering quotes, names, anything. So I just know how people feel and how I feel.
You were mentioning the 10 scales.
Yes.
Can you share some a guide on what they are?
Yes, so I've got them here. I'm going to read them out because I can never remember off the top of my head. So we've got self-reliance, self-control, self-actualization, self-confidence. And some of these will seem obvious, but some of them not quite, by the way. Self-knowing, straightforwardness, optimism, relationships, empathy, and adaptability. Okay, these are all really important emotional competencies or skills that the best leaders can adopt. And by a leader, it doesn't mean to say that you have to be a leader of people. You can just be somebody that can be seen as inspirational in a business and a leader of the business, the leader of the people around you. You don't have to have individual contributors or people reporting into you to be a leader.
Yeah, I think we should redefine leadership in some respects,
definitely.
because leadership is also just about how you are and how you carry yourself.
Yes.
So I thought a lot about that in the past when, funny enough, I think it was at Concur where I wasn't in a leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my managers saying to me at the time, just said, you are in a leadership position.
Mm.
You are a leader.
Yes.
Because you're doing deals and people are looking up to you.
Yes.
People are watching you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just an interesting reminder, because they were just saying, you don't think you're in a leadership position, but you are, because you've been here for a few years now, and the new people are looking up to you to seeing how you act, how you behave, how this happens, how that happens. He said, so just through your actions and the way you communicate internally, but also with your customers, that's leadership. And it was really great that he shared that with me, because it was like, that was like a redefining of what leadership is. You don't need the title, but the way you carry yourself for all the people that surround you, that's also leadership, because people will look towards you as well.
I've always wanted to be like to be a role model. I won't do anything or ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And I think it's a really powerful way to carry yourself. It's an important part of being a leader when you are responsible for people. But if in that situation you were just describing as a role model, that's perfect. It shows that you are carrying out your job, taking it seriously, but also showing others how to do it well.
Those 10 traits, let's pick out a couple. I'd be interested to dive a little bit deeper. I don't know how, when you look at those, what one jumps off the page?
Well, I thought you might ask me that, so I've picked out a few just to make sure we sort of maybe do a bit of a deep dive in, not a deep dive, but
Let's have a shallow dive. Let's jump into the shallow end.
Yeah, jump into the shallow end. I think that straightforwardness is one that isn't always clear what that might mean. It's about giving clear messaging to people and communicate. It's a communication skill. So as a leader, it's about how you ask people, talk to people, and engage with them in your everyday life. So like your person that you talked about going into that meeting, if you were a leader and you did that and you just walked in and said da 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 da, people will listen to what you've got to say if you're important in their world. But you've got to be able to take people with you on a journey. There's sort of like the command and control style leadership now isn't going to pay off. It doesn't work in the long run. You have to take people with you on a journey. And so laying out clear communication about where you're going and what you're doing and being really straightforward about it is a really important part of being a leader. And I'll share this with you. I did this ECR a number of years ago, and sometimes in our desire to want to be the best or to help people, it's very easy to deferring when you're a highly empathetic leader, which I score highly on. It's very easy to defer, and so what happens is that you're communicating, but you're maybe not making your point as clearly as you could, and then other people have got ideas, and you defer maybe to their idea because your empathetic part wants them to get the confidence from having the idea and carrying on with it. But actually, that's a bit of a compromise, and that's what I was doing, because I score really highly on empathy, and my straightforwardness, my communication skills were tending to be sometimes a bit fuzzy, or I would defer to somebody else. I was losing that, not necessarily respect, but I wasn't being the leader they needed me to be. I wasn't being decisive. And that took me a little while to realise that. And so, it's not always easy to take command, to not take command and control, but to be able to take back ownership of your own decisions and say, right, thank you, that's a really great idea. And I know that will come in the thread at some point, but I think this is how I've seen that we should do this. It's based on experience and where we want to go as a business. And so you have to bring it back round to your way of thinking. And that was a learning for me, probably only about 5 years ago, really, when I first started to look at this.
So straightforwardness has been probably one of the key ones.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And it's about understanding other people's needs and how they need to be spoken to as well. And to be able to express what you're thinking and what you need them to do, but also meeting their needs as well. So it's probably one of the harder ones for some people to grasp and to improve. But as I said, once you're aware of it, you can put some things in place, and then the whole review cycle goes, doesn't it? The internal review. Oh God, I didn't do a great job of that. Okay, or maybe that's because of this was going on, that was going on, and that's another thing that comes into force. Then is your optimism, because if you are always beating yourself up about doing things badly and you can't see maybe why you did them badly, or reframe that. Okay, so how can I do that better next time? That's intrinsically about optimism, which is one of the other things that I know that I touched on earlier. But optimism is a really important feature, and especially for salespeople. So in that study that I was telling you about, where we talked about the smiles, didn't we? But linked to that, there was a study done about optimism, which was an American call centre selling life insurance, and the people who were scored in the top 50% for optimism, so they did the test, the people that were highest on optimism were 30% more successful over 2 years in their sales results. And the top 10% of those were 80% more successful than the people that were below the 50% line.
And that's a mindset.
Yeah.
Optimism.
Yes,
So
yeah, it can be. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the thing about optimism is that it talks more about how you talk to yourself than the glass half full, glass half empty. So sometimes we think we're optimistic, but our internal talk track is going, oh God, that wasn't very good. What can I, they're not going to like me for that. I'm going to be in trouble. Something's going to be hauling me into the office. But actually, what your talk track, you can try and reframe your talk track into, oh yeah, I screwed up a bit there. But why did I do that? How can I do better next time? And really think about reframing what you've just done and that whole experience. And we can teach ourselves to be optimistic. I don't know whether we'd quite get Victor Meldrew there, and I'm going way back in the 80s, the 70s, 80s probably, but about humbug type character to do that, but especially for ourselves. And it's about hiring. How do we hire optimistic people? How do we test for that?
That's true.
There's some really key questions that we can be asking at interview time, not just, oh, is that glass half full or half glass empty, but it's digging into those questions about, well, how did you manage rejection? You spent all this time working on a tender, and you've told us that you didn't get it. Well, how did you pick yourself up and move forward? I think intrinsically a lot of salespeople have to be optimistic by default, because there's so many setbacks in that job that it is about resilience, isn't it? And being able to, okay, right, pick myself up. But it is about making sure that as a leader, your people recover from setbacks and really think about, what can we do differently next time? How can we change that? How can we make that better? Because the more optimistic you are and the more you try and reframe those failures, what were perceived as failures and setbacks, the more of an optimistic type of character you can become.
Yeah, I definitely feel I have no basis for of understanding that, but you're right. I feel like more optimistic salespeople are like far more likely to be successful.
Yes, yes.
It's interesting because you've got to toe a line of optimism and also a level of realism to understand, is this really going to happen?
Yes.
Because if you're just because that's when you get into happy years, and
I was just going to say that.
you know where
Yes.
you kind of you're working with your client, you're optimistic to take them on the journey, but also then there's a level of realism which is, this is never going to happen.
Yeah.
or what's the risk here, and how do I
Yes.
overcome that risk as soon as possible?
Yeah. I think that it's not necessarily the happy years bit and the sales tendency to, okay, well, maybe I haven't wanted to hear that, so I'll plough on and maybe we can push through this. I think the optimism here is subtly different. It's maybe about the fact that they take away the happy years and have people, when they've gone through that, and then reflect back on, yeah, I had happy years. And so you have to retrain them to think it. And not just is it about optimism, it's about listening skills. Listening is a really key part of hearing what people have really got to say. And although it's not called out as a part of the framework, listening skills is fundamental for all of us, and it's a really important feature of being emotionally in touch and able to relate to people.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, the listening skills within emotional intelligence, within sales, just actually truly understanding and listening to what's being said and responding, not waiting to talk, but responding appropriately based on the conversation that you just had.
And look, that's what we're doing now, isn't it? You know, you go into a customer, so many people, I deal with customers in a slightly different way maybe to how you deal with them in a sales world, but at the end of the day, they're customers and we want to have a conversation with them. And the most respectful thing that we can do is to drive a conversation, but listen to their answers. And intentional listening is really important. So, you know, I like to make notes, but I've consciously tried not to make notes so much while I'm listening to somebody, because you're so busy focusing on your notes, you miss things. Whereas really intentional listening, you can recall very quickly some of the things that have been said and you can get them down straight after the meeting. But it's about not necessarily having a shopping list of stuff to the questions you want to ask. It's being curious like you are now, and in going on to those next questions.
Well, interestingly, I'll share kind of when I've been coaching salespeople, I came up with a basic framework, and it was called listen, learn, position. So the whole purpose of that, let's just say you're doing a discovery call, 20-minute discovery call, half an hour discovery call, whatever it is. The first thing is, so the first word is listen, because that's about being curious. So what that means is you should have asked a question, then you're supposed to listen to the answer. Listen, learn. So the learn point is then, well, they've given you an answer, ask them more questions about the thing they just told you and get into more detail. Whatever it is, doesn't matter where the conversation's going, but ask why. And then position is just really at the end of the conversation, at the very, very end, if even in that conversation at all, then you position your thing. And that might just be, we're a really good fit for you. We can do whatever it is, just like this, and we'll talk about it on the next call. But for now, like, just know that we're a good fit for you. So listen, learn, position was something that only later in my sales career I realised. I was like, oh, it's this natural interest I've got, this curious interest I've got in the customer. That's why I'm getting good conversations. And I think that's also, by the way, why I don't write any notes.
Natural curiosity isn't something that everybody has. And asking the question, but it's something that can definitely be taught. And there's training you can do as I know that you know, to get people to ask open questions. But it's more about listening rather than the question, because if you really, really listen and retain what's being said anyway, the next question follows, and it's about, it's something I've deliberately tried to teach during my leadership careers, to teach curiosity, because when we're talking to customers, we only get to know them if we're curious about them. And I'm like that with people, but you have to be careful that you don't ask too many questions when you meet somebody for the first time on a social basis, because they think they're being interrogated.
I think the work basis and the customer basis, and then the personal basis. My wife was talking to me ages ago. She was like, listen, you find it so easy to talk to people. And I said, listen, she's in marketing, she's going to an event. And I said, listen, here's the easiest thing that you can do. Be really interested in the person. So I said, because she said, I don't want to talk about the products. I don't really know them that well. I said, you don't need to worry about that. It's not about that.
Yeah.
I said, what you need to do, someone comes to the stand, ask them how their day's been.
Yeah.
Ask them a little bit about why they came to the event. And then all you have to do is then ask them questions about the thing they've just said.
Yeah.
So you won't need to talk about your products.
No.
They'll be delighted that someone took a tiny bit of interest to ask them about how their day's going.
Yeah.
And coming back from the event, she goes, oh my God, it was so much different. I said, yeah, you don't need to, it's a personal skill. It's not about, I said, imagine if you went on a date with somebody, just ask them questions about themselves, but then also then share a bit about you. And it's actually, it's not that difficult, but just lead by just being naturally interested.
Yeah.
And she much preferred going to an event after that, thinking, oh, I don't need to talk about the product.
Yeah.
I was like, do you know how many times I talk about the product in my sales career? Nearly never. 90% of the time, I'm just asking about them, their business.
Yeah.
And our solution thing is the easiest thing to do. And I don't do the demos. I don't need to do them. Someone else will do the demo who will hit the key points, etc., etc. I said, but 90% of that conversation for those 6 months, 9 months to 12, I'm just asking about them and their business. It's interesting. So I want to pick up on something you were saying a few moments ago, and then we're going to go into a few more of those if those are right.
Okay.
Now I'm going to remember what you said, and I think I'm going to. You talked about the command type of leadership.
Yes. Command and control.
Command and control. But you also said that it's almost not favoured anymore.
No.
So let's expand on that, because it's something I think a lot about leadership and defining who I am and how I'm going to work with the team. But I still see a lot of command and control type leadership. And I think the outcome of that is I feel like it doesn't build relationship with the team, and ultimately your success is defined based on what the team does for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why do you feel like it's, because that used to be the way of the world?
Yes, it did, yeah. Yeah.
So what's going on there?
I think, look, I studied this a long time ago. I did do a leadership course at a local college 20 odd years ago now. And I learned about some of the older 20th century management consultants, people that were the thought leaders of the time. And there was this, we used to call it the Taylor XY leadership style. And it was really very much about, they would tell you what to do, and you weren't really even allowed to have thoughts of your own. And so it was really, really about that command and control. People have changed since then. We're more empowered. We are more emotionally intelligent, I believe, and allowed to be more authentic in the workplace. If you think about it, how long ago was it that it's not that long since women had to give up work when they had babies? When you think about where we've come from. So this opening of the doors and the emancipation and the ability to be who we are, I think over the year, it's come to the stage where we don't want to be told what to do and bullied in the workplace, because essentially it can come out as bullying. Now, it might be that person is under a lot of pressure. So the people receiving the message, if they are mature enough and experienced enough to recognise, okay, this person is under so much pressure, they're just getting cut straight to the chase, and they don't take it personally. But whoever's giving the message needs to be able to recognise that if they're sending that message out to people that have been in work for 6 months to a year, and they're going to take it personally, or they're going to feel threatened by that and feel that this is not a great place to work. So this is something else that wraps around all of this, and that's the psychological safety in the business. Okay, now you get team psychological safety, which is about the safety in the unit of your team and the ability for them to be authentic and to have a voice and feel that they can have a voice and not be frightened to voice opinions. But to get the psychological safety of a whole business right is oftentimes difficult. And you will not get psychological safety if you've got a command and control type of leadership, because people will be threatened, they'll be frightened of having a voice, being shouted at, belittled, and you just won't achieve that. And I guess the one thing that I've probably failed to mention here, the more emotionally intelligent and happier and fulfilled your organisation is, the more successful it is. That's why this is called emotional capital. It's about these competencies actually help you grow the capital of the business. You know, Martin actually says, oh, who knew there was money in emotions? But there is, because if you've got an organisation that's emotionally intelligent, you will know, there's the statistics that they are far more successful than those organisations that are not. And you'll have higher staff turnover, people won't all be pulling in the same direction. And I think that it's just a really, really important part of having a culture that will help you be more successful profitably. And you do that by being emotionally intelligent as a leadership team to start with.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is because I think there's definitely there's definitely, I've worked within businesses and for leaders who have been that type of command and control type leadership, quite authoritative, quite dictatorship. And the interesting thing is, I've always seen, because what happens is the leadership team or the leader will make comments and say things, and then what always happens is there's sub conversations.
Yes.
It's impossible for it not to happen,
yeah.
even if you have an empathetic leader.
Yeah.
It's impossible for that not to happen. But it's like if you have that type of command and control leader, the conversation, the sub conversations about them happens all the time and constantly. Oh, they said that, and then now they said that, now they said this, now they said that. And what I've seen is that there just becomes something that happens in that business where people just fall, they just don't have confidence in the leader because they didn't take the moment to say, how are you doing, and actually care, or they just didn't have the emotional awareness to think about the people and the team that you're leading instead of barking out instructions. So basically that employee feels like you don't really care about me, and therefore what happens is people just, they sort of almost rally round to go, yeah, I just, I'm not really feeling committed to this job, or I'm not feeling that. And then people quickly start looking elsewhere. In a previous role, under a certain leader, I remember at one stage, we lost about 25% of the workforce before anyone really noticed. Like we had a team, about 60 people, and we lost a large number of people. We were like, that person's left, and that person's left, and that person's left. You're thinking, what's going on here? And you can only tell from the outside, but what we couldn't tell was just that actually there was a particular style of leadership that was happening within that. Okay, now we understand what's happening, and obviously we had to make a change. And it's unbelievable what happens if you have that type of leadership for retention in today's world. Yeah. And I feel like that's why I wanted to talk about it. Really, it's just that how can we ensure that, it's almost like ensure that that's not happening. And I think that's on one spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is somebody who's very emotionally aware, has empathy, has understanding, and is that type of leader. And everything you're talking about is trying to take you on the spectrum to being closer to this person.
Yeah. Well, so emotionally aware organisations can take on this methodology and coach and train all of their staff to a degree. So they can all do the emotional capital report. Literally, it costs about £100 just to do the self-report. It's nothing. And the insights that will give an organisation is absolutely huge. And then it's up to them. If they've got a learning and development team, then they'll typically be tuned into all of this sort of thing. So they could do what I've done, and they could go and they could learn to be a coach in this area and understand what these different competencies mean and how to interpret them and how to coach. You can do it as a really low cost of entry. The great thing about this company, Roche Martin, who was developed behind this, they're very altruistic about what they're doing. They're not trying to, they're obviously not on a get rich campaign. They're on about getting people rich with their emotional intelligence as opposed to financial richness. I think that's the case anyway. And they're oh God, what was I went a little bit off piece there, didn't I?
You're talking about their mission.
Yes.
The emotional richness.
Yes. And so you can, if I was in charge of an organisation now, and I'm in an interim role currently, but if I was in charge of that organisation, I would bring this in as a methodology, as a culture at the top, because it's really difficult to push it up. If you've got a set of leaders, it helps if it starts at the top. But if I did it in my team, I did what I could to help my teams to be more emotionally in touch and use that as coaching points. And I know they always really appreciated that. And if we're in the SLT, well, I'd weave it into what we were talking about. But if you're part of a really large organisation and this doesn't figure, then you've got to get somebody's ear right at the top, and so that you can cascade it down. And it doesn't take long for it to make a lot of difference. And it's probably, we should all be coached by our leaders one way or another. And I know there's a solo person at the top, but typically, they could be, they probably got a coach somewhere or a mentor, somebody that's consulting with them. So it's really important to start somewhere in a business, and preferably at the top. Like most things, if you've got leadership buy-in, then it makes a difference, and they will be more profitable at the end of the day.
I think it hits the first thing I think about is retention. Yeah. Is because why do people leave jobs? The most basic thing in the world. Why do people leave jobs? Normally because of their manager. So it's normally not about the work. It's normally about the work environment, but really that's defined by the manager. Yeah. So is someone staying or leaving? And the way I define myself, and I talk to my team a lot about this, is if you're still all here in 3 years' time, that's my goal. Yeah. Because also from a sales perspective, it's really interesting because we're both ex-SAP.
Yes.
Is that the longer you're in a sales role, the more likely you're going to be successful. You're not really successful in the first year, but in years 3, 4, and 5, that's when you're very successful because you build the time, the cadence, the knowledge, you understand the products, the people, how to get things done. Yeah. But if you look at a lot of salespeople, they'll be in roles for maybe up to 3 years, then they move on. Yeah. Now that's when the gold is about to happen. Yeah. So if you lose a salesperson in 3 years' time, yes, that's a real problem. I don't think leadership and businesses realise that you've invested on the salesperson to get good, and now they leave and they take that knowledge somewhere else. And actually, they're about to hit gold. The next 2 years that they spend with you, which you're not going to get. Yeah. And the problem is, especially in enterprise sales, which we're in, it takes you about 18 months to 2 years to actually replace that person. Yes. Because they come in, they've got to onboard, they've got to learn. Yeah. So companies keep going through this loop. And it's bizarre to me that there's not more focus on retention because the gold is coming in the future. And that's why I talk to my team a lot about this. Let's have very long plans. So we'll keep your territory for a very long time, but we'll keeping your pipeline. It's almost the polar opposite to what I've experienced in the past, which was you've got this year, that's all. And then, 1st of January, you watch out. Yeah. So that whole retention piece, companies are missing out on significant revenue and profit and customers by not retaining their staff. I feel quite passionate about that.
Yeah, I think you've got a really valid point there, and I think the culture that we can build culture within our teams. Yes. Build that psychological safety, and they will stay far longer because, in a way, you're in a bubble. Because as long as they're happy doing what they're doing, and you can protect them from what's going on around, then they're likely to stay. Like you, I had a really high tenure in my teams when I was at Concur. And I was always very proud of that. But then on the flip side, it's funny you should say this. My son-in-law embarrassed me in the wedding speech because I gave him some involuntary career advice before, and it was about job hopping. It's like, if you keep job hopping, people are not going to be interested. The people who think you're not going to stay. To your point, if you're an individual contributor and you're looking for that next advancement, there has to be career progression as well. It's not just about being in a great culture. We're breeding people that are ambitious and they want to grow and they want to get further. And so outside of the team, there also has to be this ability to be able to develop and some form of progression framework. That's another thing that I was really interested in as well. And so being able to know where you're going and see a pathway for you also keeps people in the business. But I think it starts and stops with us as leaders in the first place. And it depends what fulfillment looks like for them as well. Is it making their goals for a few years and not worrying about what their job title is? But more and more I'm seeing people with CVs. I've done some hiring recently. And a lot of people, they're not staying for more than 2 or 3 years. And if I have people leaving like that, it's hard not to take it personally because I invest so much in them that I wonder what I've done wrong to not keep them. or what was happening, what I could have done more. So that would be my optimistic review of, or what could I have done differently to make sure they didn't feel they needed to leave.
You said a couple of words which I'm really interested in, which is psychological safety at work.
Yes.
How can we create an environment where people do feel safe from a
Yes.
psychological perspective?
And it comes with trusting the people, being an authentic leader, and allowing them to have a voice. And I don't mean to be a lemming, like you were talking about people, oh, well, I'm not putting up with this, I'm off, and everybody falls off the edge of the cliff. It's about having a constructive voice in a team and not being berated for it, and allowing ideas to come through. So people talking with honesty and with openness in an open environment and not feeling that they can't speak. Now, obviously, for people that aren't good at speaking up and saying what their fears are, that's a real win if you can get somebody that's normally quite reticent in voicing their opinions and thoughts to speak in an environment like that. But yeah, so you've got psychological team safety, but then you've got psychological safety, which is sort of like a bigger, more environmental thing within a business. It's about freedom and confidence, and self-confidence again, and knowing that they're trusted and that they trust me or their leader not to throw them under the table, under the bus for what they've said. Throw them under the table. I'll do that every time.
We've got a little bit more time, so how about we pick out a couple more of those? Which ones jump out to you?
Yes, I think that empathy is a really important one. The world has become more aware of empathy since COVID. It was really interesting. I've been looking at empathy and thinking about empathy for a lot longer. And an empathetic leader, people have had to learn empathy. And you can tell when people are saying the words or whether they mean it genuinely. But the more you say words, the more genuine it becomes. And that's the whole thing about mantras and self-development and things like that, where you're telling yourself you are something and finally you become it. But in this instance, I think that empathy is a really, really important part of what we do. And without it in the workplace, even before COVID and after COVID, it is about being empathetic. But as a leader, we have to be careful. We can be empathetic, but that doesn't mean to say that we're going to allow that person to leave at 3 o'clock every day when there are other things that they need to do, or their work's suffering, so it is a bit of a balance, being empathetic. And people often confuse empathy with sympathy. And
there's definitely a difference.
Yes, definitely a
Let's
difference.
talk about that,
Yeah. So I don't know whether you've heard of Brene Brown.
Heard of?
Yes. So I'll confess, actually, I've not read any of her books, but I've listened to her talking and snapshots of books and interviews and things like that. She really studied empathy and what that means. And there's a couple of, if you Google it, if you do Brene Brown empathy, there's a really great cartoon which really illustrates the difference between empathy and sympathy. And empathy is really about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and really truly understanding how they're feeling or what they're going through. Sympathy is just like, oh, I'm really sorry you're having a bad time. And you're not really understanding. You're sorry they're having a bad time, but you don't really try and understand what's really going on in their world. And
why do you think that empathy is important in the business world?
Because I think kindness is important. That we need to be kind to one another. And you can be empathetic to somebody's problems, but as a leader, if you don't agree that the empathy can sometimes stop it and make it harder to say no to people. If you're highly empathetic, somebody's constantly late into work, where it's an expectation. I know it's different now, but if you think about, I like people, if we're going to be in the office, let's be in by 9 o'clock, and let me know if you're not going to be in. And if there's a meeting at 9 o'clock and then constantly late, then you either set the meeting later to make allowances for it, which is fine, which is probably, if there was a personal circumstance that time in the morning, I probably would do. But it's about making sure that you're not pushover. I think that's the thing, is that you can be empathetic, sorry, but not to be a pushover, to be respected, because people can lose respect if you give in too easily. It's a bit like a child. If you always say yes to them and give them what they want, they don't respect you when they get older, do they?
No, course. It's interesting because the command control is almost here on one extreme, and then there's empathy over here.
Yeah.
That's because I feel like command and control completely lacks empathy, and I'd almost say this is the new world, with new leadership, and it's led with empathy.
Yes.
Whereas the old world, and I always think about football analogies, is that, and I'm sorry if this isn't going to land very well, but there are different types of football leaders now. You know, and in football we talk about Jurgen Klopp, we talk about Pep, and you know, some managers, some leaders like Mourinho, you know, would be seen as command and control, and then we have this kind of the new age type of leader, which is Jurgen Klopp and those guys. You know, what are they doing differently? Well, they're not barking and they're not shouting and they're not being so direct to their team. It's actually the opposite, which is I'm going to put an arm around you and tell you you're great, and pick out all your positive points, and then show them. Because also within there, you can also tell them, but also improve your left foot, or also improve this part, because then it's also coming from an act of love. I'm genuinely invested in making you better, right? And here's 3 things you do amazing. Here's 1 thing you can improve, and maybe this piece here. But also, let's focus really on your skills, but you're brilliant. You're so good at talking to the customer. You're so good at explaining the value. You're so clear in communication. You know, etc., etc. So it's building on that positive way of communicating. That's why I feel like empathy is really the most underrated skill in leadership.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's funny you chose the football analogy. Good job I can follow you. Thanks to the men in my life. But I think you forgot to say about Alex Ferguson. I think he probably stands up in the Mourinho area.
He's over here, but he also retired when he should have. When he was probably thinking, "Oh, hang on, the world's changing a bit." He was smart enough to get out.
But tell me, I don't know enough about what goes on behind the scenes. But you genuinely think that's what they're doing now in the football world? Maybe that's why it's so frustrating sometimes.
I feel it's too easy for me to say what's happening behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But I think that it's all down to tactics, and you know, there's so much to it. But I think at a base level, if we look at those 2 managers, when Mourinho did the Tottenham all or nothing, Tottenham all or nothing, you saw him, the way he communicated to some of the players, the way he spoke to Dele Alli, the way he spoke to some of the other players, and it was very direct. It was just, you're not as good as you were, you're not going to make it in the team. There was no coaching, support, guidance, love, or Dele Alli, what's going on?
Yeah.
You were playing for England a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You were scoring goals. You were the greatest talent, and now we're off track. What's happening? It wasn't that. It was just, we're not good enough anymore. So that was the kind of conversation he'd had. I wonder if Jurgen Klopp had that conversation with him, would it have been different?
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think. So what's the outcome of that? Dele Alli left Tottenham anyway, and you know, and obviously at that time he wasn't in the right place, wasn't the right frame of mind. He explained about some of the stuff that happened in his childhood, so maybe the outcome would have been different, you know. But ultimately he left. Mourinho was also fired as well. Jurgen Klopp stayed in his role, and he got the best out of his players. They won the league, etc., etc. So I feel like just having that genuine interest and care for someone and their well-being and their safety and the performance.
Yeah.
The performance is always going to be there as well.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is if you talk to anybody that's a football fan, they'll all say, "Well, if I was paid that much, I'd be expecting that as well." And it goes beyond money, doesn't it? The money's a side product of all of this. But I was very cynically thinking when you were saying that to me, "Well, they're paid enough, aren't they?" But you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, I think it comes down to some fundamentals around motivation.
Yeah.
Because when you're paid that much money, it also means nothing to them.
Yeah.
Because they can go, like, if you're getting paid 100 grand a week, 200 grand a week, you're actually, I think my view would be, they earn so much money, they don't think about money anymore.
No,
right? They won't be thinking about their bank balance because they probably don't check it. It's not even a thing. But they will be thinking about, how do I perform on the pitch? How do I get the best out here? And someone's stifling me versus someone's encouraging me. I think it actually comes down to very humane management skills at that stage.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I think you're right. How did we get into football?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I didn't want to take it there.
Well, I think it's how I met you, wasn't it, football?
Really? Was it? I can't remember. Maybe.
The Monday night football.
Oh, of course.
Trod on my foot.
Yeah, we did. We used to play. I've completely forgot all about that.
Yeah, I hadn't. My foot hasn't recovered.
See, the things that hurt you, you remember.
Yeah, I know. It was funny. You were so apologetic at the time. I was choosing to play mixed football. So
Remind me what happened.
I'm sure it was you.
Yeah, it was. It was. I remember something happened.
You trod on my foot.
Did
and
I?
it really hurt. Yeah. That's fine. I forgave you, but you apologised for about 3 years afterwards. Every time you saw me.
Probably. Oh, okay. Do you know what? I had forgotten. I remember now. The problem is, I'm a really slow runner, so it doesn't surprise me that I missed the tackle, and I probably was about 5 minutes late. You're thinking, why are you kicking me? The ball left ages ago.
No, it was fun.
I actually really remember that now. Yeah. I hadn't remembered that.
Yeah, no, I did.
But if I had remembered, I would have led with that.
No, sorry. When you're down, you think, because it was probably 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think, I still wasn't a youngster then. You were a youngster, and I think you were. And again, that comes back to that whole. I'm somebody that's been tenured in the business. I think I don't know even if I was a leader at the time, but I think you were relatively young at that point.
I would have been brand new at Cockram. So that would have been
15 years ago.
2013.
Yeah.
2013, 2012, 2013.
Okay,
something like that.
Yeah,
oh gosh, that was when we were in Slough playing football.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, I completely forgotten about that.
It's an important part of my life. I lived for it.
Yeah.
I'm only joking. It was fun though.
We've probably got time for one more. So which one more should we have a chat about?
I think the one that that might just we've touched on quite a lot of these things, but I think that self-reliance it's the first one that he talks about in the book. And I think it's one of the hardest ones to master, because I think it is self-reliance is about how reliant we are on ourselves and how we achieve things. But it, like all of these competencies and these EQ measures, they all overlap with one another. And so self-reliance is really about how we express ourselves. And when we are expressing ourselves, we're not trying to prove that we're better than somebody else. It's about us being really self-contained and comfortable with who we are and confident about where we want to get to. So self-reliance is one of those measures that a lot of CEOs and entrepreneurs typically score quite highly on, because it's quite an independence of mind, and it's about how we operate really as a leader. It is a very typically a leadership thing, but it is about having trust in ourselves and about being able to lean into where we want to get to, and not be scared to make the decisions. I've probably already talked about this, but not being scared to make decisions about doing the right thing for the business. But you have to be effective at that. You've got to pull in all of those other skills that we've talked about, because if you are the entrepreneur and you're not able to take your people with you, it's all right. You can be as reliable and as reliant on yourself as you can be, but if you want to grow your business, you've got to be able to widen those skills. And as children, where this comes from, as children, we're brought up to seek approval from our parents. That's what helps. It's a survival skill. That when you've heard this, babies are appealing so that we look after them and love them, and we grow up and we're reliant on our parents. And then what happens though for a lot of people is that instead of being reliant on their parents, they're still reliant on the people around them. But there has to come a point where you become independent of thought. You don't have to worry about what your parents are going to think, or what other people will think. You have to make decisions and go with those and have the confidence of the right decisions, because they're made with the right information and for the right reasons. So
you've touched on something there actually, which is really interesting, because and I see this a lot, where when you're thinking about what people are going to think of you, or what your parents are going to think about the thing.
Yeah.
That stays with you well into adulthood. Like, and I feel like it's until you get to a mature place. I don't know whether it's an age thing, but it's, certainly in a mature thing. It's probably since I've been past my 40s, I've stopped caring. Which certainly when I was much younger, going through, it's always about what the parents think, what other people think. I actually end up in kind of a point of procrastination of not doing things because you're just so worried about other people.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real maturity to self-reliance and self-defense.
Definitely, and it is seen as something that is a maturity aspect. And when you think about it, we talked about straightforwardness and how we communicate and our reliance on our communication skills. It's really important that we are able to be reliant, self-reliant, but communicate really well as part of that, and not put ourselves in that bubble of being so reliant that we don't get feedback from others as well. So where am I going with this? The way in which we operate, it's really important to make sure that the gates are down, the drawbridge is down, so that you get feedback in, but you have to be confident to be able to give the messages out there that you need to give, and not to worry about being judged for them, because they feel like the right thing, and you give the message in the right way, in a good, straightforward way of communicating. So this is where the quote about no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. It's about control of your environment and the way that you keep control of what the outcomes you want. If you give away control to somebody to bring something to fruition, and it's not a command and control type of control. This is just about control of your emotions and your feelings. This is about how you're effective in your role as a leader, and you can't give away that emotional control unless you allow it to happen.
Let's break down that quote again. It's the second part, which is the powerful piece.
Without your consent.
Without your consent.
Yes. So if I'm trying to think of a situation that I might have been in where this has happened, but if you are in a meeting with a CEO and they're going, you need to do this, this, and this, and you're starting to feel as if defensive. Well, I've done that, and that's not a great way to feel when you're in a conversation with a CEO. But it's about coming out of that meeting and not feeling as though you've been made to feel smaller and inferior, because you only allow that to happen by giving that away. You can keep that control with you of your feelings and emotions, and you can walk out of that room as an optimist. You can think, right, okay, that could have gone better. How can I revisit this and do it better next time? But also, you don't have to come out feeling as though you've been put down. You just come out and feel as though you've had an adult business conversation, and that you don't feel any less for it.
That's the thing, that last comment there, you don't feel any less for it. Because what I think about a lot is that every day there is pain and struggle and failure and feedback. And the last piece is growth.
Yeah.
And it's like I feel like I'm constantly in that loop, whatever it is, whether it's at work, it's at home, it's in the gym, it's all of those things all the time. And then, I'm finally getting somewhere. Growth, great. And then you fail at the next thing again, and then you're back to failing, and then it starts to improve. And I feel like those sorts of meetings, you can listen. No one's perfect. That's impossible. So that's great. So forget that straight first. And you are going to do things that aren't to someone's standards or expectations at times. And it's really about how you then, if you get that feedback, how do you turn that into growth? Or do you go the other way and turn that back into, I'm constantly failing and constantly failing. So it's kind of like this.
Well, that's the internal self-talk that optimism is very much based on. And I know it doesn't feel like optimism as we know it, but it's that self-talk that we make in our head about the results of an experience that we've just had. And that is the measure of our ability to be able to, how can I not make that happen? How can I stop that happening again? And just reframing that whole thought process.
I've loved chatting to you today.
Thank you, Simon.
It's been a great conversation. I told you we'd go longer than half an hour.
Oh my God.
See?
Oh, we'll be asleep.
Wow. And it's only because I need to go and pick up my son
Yes.
from preschool, or else I'd
Yes.
still be asking you way more questions. But
Yes.
it's been a real joy speaking to you, so thank you.
Yes.
If someone wants to get in contact with you to learn more, or find out about coaching or working with you, what's the
Yes.
best way of doing so?
I think the best way at the moment is that I'm an affiliate on the website of Emma Maslin with the Inspire'em crew.
Emma, yeah. I'll
Yes.
send my regards and my love.
Yes, I will do. So Inspire'em is an organisation, or you can just email me at nataliegwilt99@outlook.com.
You've actually just reminded me, when I worked within Emma Maslin's sales team, we did some emotional intelligence training then.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that being a brilliant day.
Yes.
And we had a book, I can't remember what the book was called now, but there was an emotional intelligence book which we read, which was part
Is
of...
it a little white book?
Yes.
Yes, that's the Daniel Goleman methodology that we were using, and it was delivered by L&D, I think.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I remember feeding back to Emma and just saying that was probably some of the best training
Yes.
we've ever
Yeah.
done in a business.
Yeah.
And I I was very welcoming of it.
Yeah.
And then me and Emma went on and she introduced me to Myers-Briggs,
Yes.
which again...
There's all these assessments.
Yeah.
We could assess ourselves inside out, upside down, and I love them because I think it helps us. It takes us a step further to understanding ourselves. But what's really powerful, and although you could say it doesn't matter because we're who we are and what people think of us doesn't matter, but if we have something that we can be better at and how we're perceived is really important. I had a really strong message. I had a really massive learning and aha moment in my early 20s about that. It was scary. I was a really, really rough-edged individual, lacking in self-awareness, lacking in emotion. I was kind, thoughtful, but lacking in a lot of these things. So yeah, that was a big wake-up moment for me. And I think it's when the journey starts. It's when somebody says to you, actually, that isn't quite the best it could be. And you need somebody to tell you that. And that's why I always think that coaching and feedback in a business particularly is really, really important.
Completely agree. We've almost ended where I should have started.
No, there's no should about it. The thing is, if I'd given you my 10 scales, you'd have been giving me a quiz about all of those over the last hour plus.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we got to
Yes.
everything. But
Yeah,
thank you so much.
No,
I
lovely.
appreciate
It's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.